How we doing? It's IB Nation Sports Talk, and it's a little earlier than I'm used to, but here we go. Little early show. Brian Roberts, he's used to the 1 o'clock time slot. How are you today out in New Jersey?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm good. I know this is a first time. I mean, I've guessed on the show before, man, but this is our first time in the section, I guess. So it's fun,
That's what
man.
I was thinking. I was like, Brian asked me yesterday, and I was like, I don't think we've actually done a full show together before. Like
I
you
don't think
said, you've
so.
been on the show a couple times and that kind of thing. So we'll have a good time. We're going to talk some NFL draft, specifically kind of look back at where Notre Dame's guys went and what we think of where they went, in the draft specific, in the order, and then with the teams that they're matched up with now and some of the undrafted free agents and that kind of stuff. A thin draft class once again for Notre Dame, and we'll talk about that as well. But the reason we're switching things up today, you get to do the old double dose show. You'll be here with me this afternoon, and then at 6 o'clock tonight, you and Brian doing a little Kennedy Urlacher commitment preview. He's committing, I think, right at 6 o'clock or right around 6 o'clock tonight. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, he is. For people that don't follow the recruiting backgrounds too much or the recruiting space, he is the 2024 safety out of Chandler, Arizona. He's the son, obviously, of Brian Urlacher, who is a Hall of Fame linebacker for the Chicago Bears. He is dropping a graphic, I believe, at 6 o'clock Eastern time. So we'll all know the final decision there. He's choosing between Notre Dame, TCU, Kansas State, Illinois, Miami, and there was one more that is escaping me at the moment, but that is kind of the final six is basically what he's picking. Penn State was the other one outside of Notre Dame. So that's the final six that he's going to be picking from. We feel really good about where Notre Dame stands, obviously going into the final decision here, and then me and Brian will break it down if he does opt for the Irish tonight.
And I remember seeing his graphic over the weekend. I think that he tweeted, and I was, I guess it was like, which of these things don't belong? I was surprised to see Kansas State in the mix with all those other schools, but they obviously did a good job recruiting him to at least get that far. We'll see exactly where he ends up tonight, but Brian and Ryan will have that show at 6 o'clock. That's why I'm here again for this one. I kind of like this show, that's like this time slot. Actually, I was like, wow, kind of throw a few things together and go on right at 1 o'clock and then have other things to do later in the day. You'll have another show to do. I did that a couple of weeks ago. I did the double dip with Brian. I think that was after the last practice, the open practice that we got to see in the spring.
Yeah.
But
oh man, it's fun to double dip. We did that on Thursday night for the first round of the draft. Me and Brian did I guess it was the 2 o'clock show. We kept it to 2 o'clock. Actually, no, it was a 1 o'clock show. And then we were live showing from 7:30 to 12:30 at night. So that was a good time, man. It was a good time.
I mean, that's more than a double dip right there, is what that is. But kept on going. We'll smash that like button if you would. We do appreciate it, and it helps us out quite a bit. And of course, Bryce Young. I see now I'm going to have a hard time with that. I know, because the son of Bryant, obviously, but Bryce Young committed over the weekend. So it's been. I guess it was a nice sort of into the week after all the other drama with the transfer portal and all that stuff that we've had the last couple of weeks.
Well, unfortunately, I had a wedding on Saturday night, so I wasn't able to be on the live show for the Bryce Young commitment. But luckily, on tomorrow, the 2nd of this month, his teammate, Bryce Young's teammate at Charlotte Christian, Micah Gilbert, will also be announcing a decision, and Notre Dame is in the mix for that one as well. So there might be a live show tomorrow to make up for lost time for not being at the Bryce Young commitment. So,
all right. Do we know what time that commitment might be? Do we know that?
That is I believe that one is also at 4 o'clock Eastern tomorrow.
Okay. All right. So we'll see what happens tomorrow then. Well, the order of business today is the NFL draft. Again, we're kind of recapping what happened. 259 players drafted this weekend, and I don't know where you are on the movie Draft Day, Ryan, but Vince and I talked about it a little bit last week, and I not as hot on it, I think, as a lot of people. I found it very unrealistic, but with the draft, the trades that were made and all that kind of stuff with Sonny, wheeling and dealing, and so I'm going to give up the picks, and now I'm going to stick at number one, and I'm going to take the linebacker that probably doesn't deserve to be a first round pick, but I'm going to take him number one overall. But,
no, man, that's it, man. That's it. What was his name? Something Mac. Vontae Mac. No matter what, man. Yeah,
that's right.
That's
Vontae Mac, no matter what.
Shaw, we saw a little bit of that though, man. It wasn't quite to that degree, but we saw the Arizona Cardinals trade back from 3 to 12 and then trade back up to 6 to take their offensive tackle, Paris Johnson, out of Ohio State. So the wheeling and dealing's not quite as extreme as draft day, but there was a little bit of action for us though, man. It was a little bit.
And that's kind of, maybe even more so, like you said, the Cardinals traded back up. Houston, made their trade, and then they decide to trade up. And just with the fact, I have no problem with Houston going up there and getting Will Anderson Jr. at number 2. But, just like with Sonny, they had to mortgage quite a bit of their future to move up. And I guess the only thing that I look at when, with them making that deal is like, man, do you really think with a rookie quarterback and Will Anderson Jr. as good as he is, are you going to be that good that soon that you're willing to, because you need to fill your roster, that you're willing to mortgage, because they gave up, what was it, a first round pick last year? I think they gave up, a second rounder and a third round, so they gave up a lot of draft capital to move up there. And the Lions, the way they kind of traded around as well was a little bit Sonny, I thought.
man, this first round in this draft this year was a little bit of chaos, man. I even put it like this, Sean, we had 3 trades of teams going into the top 10. We had obviously talked about the Houston Texans coming up to 3 for Will Anderson. You talk about the Cardinals trading back in to number 6 for Paris Johnson Jr. And then the Eagles traded from 10 to 9 to make sure that they got Jalen Carter out of Georgia. Right. 3 trades in the top 10. None of them involving quarterbacks, though. And that's a rarity amongst itself, right? Usually movement in the top 10 is for quarterbacks. So just to kind of look at that, it was a very strange draft. I think number 10 overall really kind of flipped everything on its head. Mm-hmm. But to your point, I think that we're in an era of free agency now where we can see turnarounds a lot quicker than what we used to. There used to be minimal roster turnover back in the day, right? Nowadays, it's a roster from one year to the next could look so different so quickly. And the Houston Texans aren't exactly in the greatest division of all time. I mean, the Jaguars were the division winner last year. They're a good young team, but they're not fantastic, right? So I think you look at that and say, the quick turnarounds can happen. But again, that was a lot to give up, though, for a defensive end, although a great one, in my opinion. You're right. You are mortgaging a lot. So you better hope that those 2 guys hit, man, or else you've cost yourself a little bit of draft capital over the next couple of years.
Well, and the thing, again, with the Lions, they trade down from 6 to 12, and they end up getting Jahmyr Gibbs with that number 12 pick. And according to the draft points chart, I saw this, they gave up 1,785 points to make that trade. They got back 1,783. Now, I know they made a couple other moves, and they got some of the points back or whatever, but still, it was a little bit of a wash. And my thing was I felt like it was a huge reach to get Jahmyr Gibbs at number 12 when you could have just stayed where you were and just taken Bijan Robinson and, and gone that route instead. But
that's true. That's true. The Lions were the weirdest draft because they had 2 picks in the top 20. They had 12 and they had 18. They took a running back with 12, Jahmyr Gibbs, who's a good football player. But to your point, 12 for a team that already had 2 viable running backs on the roster. That's a little, I don't know if that's a position that I would necessarily allocate that high of a pick. And then number 18, you took a linebacker, which I played linebacker. I love linebackers, but Jack Campbell is he's a true Mike linebacker at the next level. He's going to play tackle to tackle. He's not going to give you a ton as far as pass game production. So you took 2 positions in the top 20 that you could say are 2 of the most devalued positions currently in the NFL nowadays with how it's played, running back and linebacker on defense. Those are the 2 spots where you say, I maybe don't have to invest high draft capital in, and I've been okay recently. I mean, you look at some of the top linebackers in the NFL, top running backs in the NFL, it's a lot of second round and later draft picks. So, I mean, it was a very interesting philosophy that they put out, but we'll see how it works out, man. I mean, they got two
Yeah.
good football players, so we'll see.
Zone 6 says Bears win in the division. And I mean, I think probably the two most wide open divisions are the NFC North and the AFC South. I mean, AFC South could theoretically have what, 3 rookie quarterbacks starting at the start of the season. You know, Will Levis, and obviously Aaron Rodgers is gone now. That's going to be a really, you know, the NFC North is going to be really interesting. Let me ask you before we talk about the Notre Dame guys, the whole Will Levis thing, because you know, again, like I said last week, that I stopped paying attention to all the mocks, especially, you know, like the big mocks about a week or so before the draft starts, because everything is just smoke screens, misdirections. You know, they're putting out misinformation because they want to draft their guy in the spot they want. All this, like, you do draft evaluation. Did you ever consider Will Levis, you know, like a high first round type guy? He ends up going in the second round, obviously, to Tennessee.
I didn't. We talked about this last week before the draft. I had a 3rd round grade on Will Levis. I wasn't very high on him at all. I think that for me, though, you do find a lot of quarterbacks that get pushed up the board a ton, right? Like, because I'm evaluating in a vacuum, right? So, but that doesn't involve positional value, right? Like if I have a 2nd round grade on a quarterback, most likely they're probably going to go in the 1st round. I'll say this, though, about the Will Levis conversation. I think it ended up being the right decision by the NFL, not drafting him in the 1st round, because I just never saw 1st round caliber quarterback as far as what he was.
Yeah, I concur.
But I will say this, Sean, like I did a bunch of post-game shows. I was on with Brian, and like one of the first thing that people ask you after the 1st round is, or just after the draft in general, is what surprised you the most during this draft or during the 1st round? Like, what was your biggest surprise? And usually they're waiting for you to say a pick that happens, right? Like, oh, that pick happens. Like, well, that surprised me a little bit. Like Darnell Wright to 10 to Chicago, for instance, like that would have been one for me where it's like, that was a little bit of an odd one. I probably would have taken Peter Skoronski or Broderick Jones, but, you know, obviously they saw it differently. The biggest shock to me was that Will Levis didn't go in the 1st round. I mean, everyone I talked to sounded like the league was very high on Will Levis, and for whatever reason, fell to the 2nd round. I think it's good for Will, though, because it honestly, it tempers expectations a little bit. And he lands with Tennessee, where I look at that and I say, you know, in Tennessee with that heavy run game and and Mike Vrabel coaching the way he does, I think that's actually a pretty decent situation for Will Levis to hopefully develop. So expectations are a little lower, decent spot for him overall.
Yeah. I mean, Tannehill has obviously thrived in, you know, in terms of his career since he's been there. So I guess you can say if he could do it, then Will Levis should be able to.
That's it, man.
Well.
That's it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, let's talk about some of these Notre Dame guys. And David was asking earlier, how many picks did Notre Dame end up having in the draft where they didn't make top 10? Yeah, they had 3 guys drafted: Michael Mayer, Isaiah Foskey, Jarrett Patterson. That was it. So if you want, you know, I guess we can kind of start with that. Just the fact 3 guys end up being drafted from Notre Dame. And it was a thin draft class last year for the Fighting Irish as well. So I guess kind of what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, because to your point, the 2022 NFL draft, there were only 3 players drafted as well. So for me on this conversation, it always, there's always some context to it. And I think you look at this team this last year, and I remember in the summer, Sean, like me and Brian were on this show just kind of pumping out like the core of this team that we're so excited about were the sophomores and freshmen from this past year that are now going to be the juniors, sophomores, and another great freshman class coming in. It was a very young football team for Notre Dame last year. I mean, you talk about who are the best players on the team, you would say guys like Joe Alt. You would say guys like Benjamin Morrison, talking about a sophomore and a true freshman. Cam Hart went back to school, right? Defensive line-wise, Isaiah Foskey leaves. He was the 40th overall selection, so he was a top 40 pick. Michael Mayer leaves on the offensive side of the football. He's a number 35 overall selection. So your 2 best players potentially last year were still drafted top 40, right? Let's that's still pretty good. Again, like Michael Mayer should have been a 1st round pick. I'm sure we'll talk about that during this podcast a ton. But you still had 2 guys that went pretty early. But I think the context of like a smaller class is that, we don't have Benjamin Morrison wasn't draft eligible this year. Aldrich Estime wasn't draft eligible this year. Joe Walt wasn't draft eligible this year. Blake Fisher wasn't draft eligible this year. Tobias Merriweather wasn't draft eligible this year. Like, there's a lot of young talent on this Notre Dame team. So if this keeps happening, though, like 2024 NFL draft or into the 2025 cycle, and there's still like 3 guys drafted each cycle for Notre Dame, that's an issue. Because that's either telling you there's not enough talent there or they're not being developed properly. It's one of the two or a combination of both. So I think as long as it doesn't last long term, I think that it'll be fine, right? It was just that this class, I mean, my question would be to everyone, who of the 2023 class did you think was going to get drafted otherwise? I mean, I came on this show beforehand and I was like, I'm not sure Brandon Joseph gets drafted. Said that. Jason Amalola was a borderline draftable player, ends up signing a high, undrafted free agent deal with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Just wasn't a lot of guys in this year's class, man. So it's not like there's a bunch of guys that just fell through the cracks and didn't get drafted and whatever it might be. It was just that it was a small draft class. And if it's a small draft class for multiple years after that, I think that's when the alarm starts sounding a little bit. But I'm not overly concerned about it just because we kind of knew it was going to be a smaller class with guys like Cam Hart going back to school.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a great point because it goes back to what we've talked about on our shows with the transfers and stuff like that. Like, guys are transferring out because they're lower on the depth chart. And in some cases, they're having a hard time even competing with these younger guys on the roster who, have more stars coming in and all that kind of stuff. And over the course of time, now you might not necessarily, be Georgia in a year and have all these defensive players drafted in the first round. Everyone wishes they were that fortunate. But at the same time, I think that it's going to, because it wasn't that long ago. They had like 6, 7, 8 guys, it was, they set a record, I think, maybe 3 or 4 years ago with how many
something
guys
like
they had
that.
drafted.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, and to your point, Sean, I know Brian, I was talking to Brian on the phone earlier and he had talked about the previous 2 years before Georgia won a national championship. They'd only put out 6 guys into the NFL as well in those 2 drafts. And that's the same what Notre Dame just did, right? Yeah. And then and then Georgia wins a championship and it's like, oh, now 15 guys get drafted. Well, that matches, right? It's like really good football team. Also some draft type because of championship caliber team. Those things usually follow suit. So again, Notre Dame is acquiring talent. Notre Dame needs to develop the talent more properly, consistently moving forward, and they'll be fine in that regard. It's just about winning football games and developing the talent they have because Notre Dame has a lot of talent, obviously.
Yeah, so Michael Mayer, as we all expected, the highest of the 3 Irish guys to get drafted. He goes number 35 overall to the Raiders early in the 2nd round. He's the 3rd tight end pick, though. Dalton Kincaid goes number 25 overall to Buffalo, and he also went 1 pick behind Sam Laporta out of Detroit. And there was the whole Buffalo traded 1 pick in front of Dallas, and I was worried that the Giants might end up taking Michael Mayer. They were sitting there 1 pick ahead, and then I think that pick traded a couple of different times. Buffalo trades there, and I was just talking about the smoke screens, and it's like, that was the smoke coming out of Dallas earlier this week, not necessarily all on Michael Mayer, but tight end. And it's almost like, they forced Buffalo to trade up and they grab Kincaid. But then I'm sitting there watching the draft and I'm like, yes, he's there. And then it kind of turns out it doesn't even sound like, Dallas was really talking that much about Mayer. But before we get into that part of the conversation, the fact that Mayer not only ends up slipping out of the first round, because starting with Mozzie Smith to Dallas at 26, you had some other defensive linemen who went late in the first round, and so Mayer slips out of the first round and becomes the 3rd tight end to be picked as well. Like, how in your mind did both of those things end up happening?
It was the weirdest. It was one of the weirdest things, and we talked about it a ton, the Mayer thing. For one, Sean, everybody that I had talked to, scouts, just media members as well, kind of that have a opinion that is plugged in to decide the NFL, I heard back pretty unanimously that Michael Mayer was considered the top tight end in the draft for most teams. Like, that's just kind of where it is. But I think this is a great telling tale of, it only takes one team to change that, right? And it only took one team. It only took 2 teams when we're really looking at it, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there were a lot of people that liked Dalton Kincaid a ton. So was I shocked that Dalton Kincaid went before Michael Mayer? No, I wasn't shocked. Was I surprised a little bit? Yes, I was surprised, but I wasn't shocked. The shocking thing to me was that, one, Michael Mayer slid out of the first round because I just didn't think that was going to happen. I mean, you were looking at the tail end of that first round, especially. I mean, you mentioned the Dallas Cowboys. The Buffalo Bills were obviously a team. The Detroit Lions at 18 were a team that needed a tight end as well. Like, there were teams that needed legitimate help at the tight end position that just chose to pass for whatever reason, even on their first round option. So him falling out of the first did shock me a little bit. But I think that the other shocking thing was if Darnell Washington had some apparently had some medical issue, so that was kind of why he fell to the third round. But if Darnell Washington, for instance, would have went off the board to Detroit with that as that second tight end, I would have understood it a little bit more, because I look at Darnell Washington and I say, that guy is completely different than Michael Mayer, like completely different football player. And sometimes when guys are so different, it's just a team that has a preference to one type of player. Like, I get that, right? Sam Laporta thing, I can't make sense of. I can't. For me, he's an inline guy. He can play detached a little bit. He ran 4.59 at the combine. So, like, he's a good athlete, right? But, like, he's not a Dalton Kincaid where Dalton can play in the slot. Dalton can play in boundary at times. Like, Sam Laporta is going to play attached or closer to the line of scrimmage a ton.
He's much more Dan Campbell. Like, he's that mold, you know? Like, I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but he's definitely, like, you know, in the Dan Campbell mold, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's because Kincaid's a guy that you're just not going to use in line to block a ton. Like, it's just not his game. But Sam Laporta, you are a little bit. He's a smaller package, but he is going to play in line a ton. So when you kind of compare those two together, I'm just like, man, I just don't understand what the sell is over Michael Mayer. Like, he can run faster in a straight line, but you look at the production and you're just like, man, like, Michael Mayer is just better than this kid. Like, I mean, it just flat out is, right? But at the end of the day, I think the Raiders got one of the biggest steals in the draft. I mean, to get Michael Mayer as the third tight end off the board at pick 35, I think he's going to go into that room. That is not a great room, by the way. There's not a ton of talent in that room right now. They need, I think, Hendon Hooker is their number one tight. Yeah. They traded Darren Waller to the New York Giants this offseason. So, like, they don't have a true number one tight end. I think Michael Mayer is going to go in there, man. He's going to be a dog from day one. So, it gave the hats off to the Raiders. They got a tremendous value at 35. It's a shame that it happens. It's a shame that the fall happens for Michael Mayer, but he's going to be in a position where Jimmy Garoppolo has had a lot of success with tight ends, obviously, in the past with his time in San Francisco with George Kittle. So I think that he's going to do really well pretty early on in his career. And we're going to look back on this a few years ago and be like, man, that was a little bit of an overthink right there. Like, that was probably not the best thought in the world.
I think so too. And, you know, and again, as a Cowboys fan, I'm sitting there the whole first round and I'm sweating. And then, like, when Roger Goodell starts saying Mozzie Smith, you know, the M comes out, it's and then it switches to Ma, and I'm like, no, that's not the right sound. It's Mike, it's Michael, it's not Ma. What are you talking about? And then, of course, it was like slow motion. And then what was the other pick? The Cincinnati Bengals. I can't remember who they took.
That was the most shocking one because
his name started with an M as well.
Miles Murphy was the one that they drafted out of Clemson. Sean, that was one where I was like, there's no way they're going to let Michael Mayer, who grew up 20 minutes from Cincinnati, by the way, in Kentucky. Like, there's no chance that he gets past Cincinnati. And he got past Cincinnati.
I know. It's just, I think you're right. I think there was some overthinking. I think there were some other people just reading some of the draft grades who weren't completely sold on Michael Mayer's athleticism. You know, that's, you know, like the athleticism and maybe some speed or knocks. But, like, you know, again, like, the Cowboys used almost every minute of their allotted time for that pick. And so in the meantime, ESPN is showing, you know, the Mayer to Witten comparisons. And of course, it's building my hope up even more. And they're like, Mike, you know, Jason Witten could do this. And it's like, this is the closest guy to Jason Witten since Jason Witten. And I'm like, yes. And then
that was my comp too, Sean. That was my comp all cycles. I compare him to Jason Witten. He reminds me so much of him, but I know, man, they really set you up for failure as a Cowboys fan, man. They really did. I'll say this though. My wife's a big Eagles fan, so she's happy that he's not in Dallas, but
and I mean, like, you know, again, you being the draft guy, like, when you look at who Dallas has to play and the fact that you're taking a nose guard in the first round, that is, you know, it's late in the first round for one, but a nose guard that a lot of people consider just a 2-down nose guard as well.
Yep.
But when you've got to play that run heavy Eagles team, I mean, you've got to be better against the run. So
I get it.
Can you talk me off the ledge and tell me that they made a good choice by going this direction instead of, Michael Mayer or whoever,
From a practical approach, try to get bigger inside, I guess makes sense, right? Like it does.
Yeah.
I think that there
Micah Parsons was happy about it. So
oh yeah, man, having a space hating 320 plus pounder in front of you that can move a little bit, like yeah, he's gonna be really excited about that. And I mean, I'll say this: we don't like Michigan on this podcast, obviously, right? But they're well coached, man. They're well coached. They are. So I think Mozzie's gonna come in and he's gonna be exactly what Dallas wants. He's gonna be a stalwart in running downs and obviously running situations. Because he was on Bruce Feldman's freak list, so he apparently tests as a great athlete. So you have to see if you get more out of. You have to see if you get more pass rush production out of him. But again, to your point, it's understanding that you are playing against a Philadelphia Eagles team that just made it to the Super Bowl and had one of the dynamic running games in the NFL. So you have to win a division before you make a Super Bowl run, right? You got to win your division before doing that. And I guess that's kind of the thought process that went into it.
Yeah. As JWick 13, I just put it up there. At least he's got a cool name. He does have a cool name. And, like
Mozzie's a cool name.
Yeah, Mozzie's a very different name. And it's like, he's excited. Well, but then what also gets me is, so Dallas sees Kincaid. Well, they weren't going to get Kincaid because they weren't going to trade up. And then they don't take Mayer. Laporta is a guy who I think that they were actually in love with. And obviously the Lions ended up taking him early in the second round, like we talked about. So they end up, they go Michigan again at number 58 and get the tight end, Luke Schoonmaker, who quite honestly, like I had given, no thought to going into this draft. And like I saw Dane Brugler had him as his 7th tight end in this draft. So like I don't know what you think about Schoonmaker, but that's who they end up with, as the consolation prize at 58.
Schoonmaker, he was one of 2 players that had Senior Bowl invites that the East-West Shrine game stole from them, basically. One was Zay Flowers out of Boston College. The other was Luke Schoonmaker out of Michigan. The NFL has been high on Schoonmaker. I wasn't surprised that he went that early necessarily from just kind of the perception of the NFL. I was more surprised about a couple guys that were still on the board. Like, I mean, I personally would have taken Darnell Washington or Tucker Kraft from South Dakota State. Like, those kind of would have been the tight ends that I went with. Yeah. But Schoonmaker, I will say this. Schoonmaker had his best season this year. Eric All got injured, obviously. They're the starting tight end for Michigan, and he had his best season. And aside from Darnell Washington, Luke Schoonmaker is the best blocking tight end in his drafts by a landslide. Like, he controls the line of scrimmage, he displaces gaps, and he had some production this past year. So I think it's kind of a projection a little bit, but I mean, he's a big kid. He's got strong. He's got some athleticism to him. It is a projection, but he has a legitimate profile that can get you excited on the NFL if he's developed properly. So I think he'll end up being a good player for Dallas. It's just I probably would have taken a different tight end in that spot, but I still think he's a good football player.
Yeah. Wasn't the happiest seeing 2 Michigan guys end up there.
Oh, man. I didn't even think about that at first, Sean. I didn't even think about that, man.
That's what Vince made sure to text me that. Another Michigan guy. I'm like, yeah, just shut up.
You're like the Philadelphia Eagles are going for all Georgia guys, man. Now you're all Michigan.
Like Georgia I could handle. I mean, there's the Eagles. These Eagles are going to continue to be hard to handle for a while. That's going to be a tough matchup. But you can ask both Vince and Jesse. My text after the Mozzie Smith draft pick, I was not a happy person, and I was sour most of the weekend after that. So.
I understand, man. It's all right. I'm a Rams fan, and they drafted Stetson Bennett in the 4th round, so not everybody was happy this weekend. Not everyone was happy this weekend.
Hey, you got another Georgia quarterback. Congratulations.
Yeah. For that long track record of being really good outside of Matt Stafford. So
exactly. Stafford number 1, and then Stetson, maybe number 3, I guess.
Sure.
What about Isaiah Foskey? I think that, like if there's a bright spot in this whole thing, like as disappointed as maybe we were, that Mayer fell into the second round. The fact that Isaiah Foskey not only went in the second round, he goes 40 overall, so he goes high in the second round. Not a whole lot of people were thinking that, I don't think, going in. Were you surprised at all that he went that high?
A little bit. I think I said on a preview show that I thought he was going to go somewhere in like the late second, so like somewhere 50 to 64 ish, like somewhere in that ballpark. So he went a little bit higher than I thought. I thought he was going to be a second round pick, but he went obviously higher in the second. I love the fit right there, Sean. Like that was one of my favorite fits for Notre Dame guys in this class, including undrafted free agents, because for me, one, the Saints need immediate help opposite of Cam Jordan. Right now, their starting defensive end is Carl Granderson, who's like a solid rotational player. They also have Peyton Turner, who was a first-round pick a couple years ago, but that hasn't really done anything in the NFL, has kind of been a bust up until this point. So there's immediate need for return on Isaiah Foskey. And the great thing is you get Isaiah on the field on the other side of Cam Jordan. Cam Jordan is a player that is going to get all the attention up front, right? Like eyes are going to go to him. So I think Foskey has the ability to get some one-on-one opportunities pretty early on in his career, potentially, at least as a rotational kind of pass rush specialist early. And I absolutely love Isaiah Foskey being in the same room as Cameron Jordan. I love it because Cameron Jordan has, since he's come out of Cal, I think he's been in the league 10 years now, 11 years, somewhere in that ballpark.
Right around there, yeah.
He is one of the most technically sound pass rushers in the NFL. And that's one thing that Isaiah lacks right now is Isaiah is, I mean, it's the God-given stuff. He's 6'5 plus, 264, 34-inch arms, 4.58 in the 40. He's explosive. He's long. He's got all the tools. But he's not technically refined right now. He needs a pass rush plan. He needs to be better with his hands. Well, what better guy to work with in the NFL than Cam Jordan right now? Like, that's another guy that is going to immediately show Isaiah Foskey how to be a pro and how to work his hands, how to add moves to the arsenal. I really think that he is going to benefit a lot with being a guy like Cam Jordan. So I think it's a fit for the immediacy of getting more talent in that edge room opposite Jordan. And I also love the fact that Cameron Jordan gets to tutor Isaiah a little bit, man, and to really develop him as a player. And I wouldn't be shocked if his career trajectory is very good at this point, it's being the 40th overall pick, because I think he's going to be around good people, obviously. And Dennis Allen, although I'm not sure he's a great head coach, he's a really good defensive coach. So I think that'll be great for a guy like Foskey.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, what you were talking about, the technical stuff, the lack of multiple moves, it was mostly bull rush type stuff. And you read all the evaluations, that was really the biggest knock on Foskey. It wasn't athleticism or, nope. It was not, obviously he tested well at everything. It was just a matter of, you can't just be a one move pass rush guy in the NFL. If he had a couple other moves that he could go to, he probably would have been like a mid first round type guy. Yeah. But I completely agree with what you're saying. To be in New Orleans with a veteran like Jordan now, I mean, there's an opportunity for him to learn some of that stuff. And all you got to do is learn a couple extra moves, I think, and he can be a really productive NFL defensive end for a long time.
I think it's the craziest thing in the world, Sean, that we talk about. It's that we're talking about a guy that is Notre Dame's all-time leading sacker, right? With 26 and a half sacks. And everyone knows that he can be better, right? Like he's not nearly to his ceiling. That's how talented Isaiah Foskey is. So yeah, man, get him in a good defensive room, which I think he's in. Dennis Allen's a really good defensive coordinator, really good defensive mind as the head coach. And I really think that being with a guy like Cameron Jordan is going to be a massive help to a guy like Isaiah Foskey. So I think you said it perfectly, man. Like he's not the bendiest guy of all time, right? Like he doesn't have to lose his hips, but like there's nothing about his game where you say that guy can't be really, really good or potentially special if he hits. Like he has all the tools. It's just about that development. And I think that going into the Saints room, I think that he's going to be in a really good spot there, man. Honestly, that's like top 64 picks. So the first two rounds, that was one of my favorite fits in the first two rounds. Cause I'm just like, that makes so much sense, not only from the team, but also from the fact of the room that he's landing in. I just think that's going to be so beneficial for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What about Jarrett Patterson? He's the only other Irish player drafted. He goes in the 6th round to Houston. Again, like as they started getting into the late rounds, selfishly, I'm thinking, okay, offensive line is an area of need for Dallas. They wanted, like a swing lineman. They ended up going with Asim Richards in the 5th round out of North Carolina. instead. But Patterson, again, like I think that Patterson is a steal where the Texans ended up getting him in the 6th round.
I mean, it wasn't too long ago that we thought that Jarrett Patterson could be a top 100 pick, top 50 pick, potentially even, right? Like he looked like he was going to be that guy after his redshirt freshman and redshirt sophomore years. I just really think that, and the reason that he fell in this draft is the durability stuff a little bit. It's the medicals, the medical rechecks, that type of conversation. Because Jarrett Patterson's definitely better than the number 211 player in the class, for instance. Like he's better in that regard. But I think that what you saw here is that there's some medical conversations, and Jared's also not just a player that he never got truly better his last 2 years. Like he kind of plateaued a little bit, and some of it was, the offensive line coaching for most of his career. And then some of it is also just the fact that he was banged up at times and, going into his junior. And then he also had to make the transition from center to right guard as a senior, which is like a tough transition at times. Right. But I really think that the value of him in the 6th is a tremendous value. I predicted that he was going to go in the 4th to 5th round. So he went even lower than I thought he was going to go. And I think that you look at the Houston Texans, they're going to say, and they literally said this after they drafted him, the ability to play multiple positions is big for a guy like a Jarrett Patterson, because we know he's more of a center than he is a guard. But what is the beneficiary of the final year? It's that you saw some tape at guard at Notre Dame. So now as a team, you're like, you can back up multiple positions. Even if he never becomes a starter in the NFL, he's a guy that can come in and help us maybe start some games, but also at worst, he's a backup center guard at the next level that can help fill out a depth chart. And that matters so much for those offensive linemen in day 3. The guys that stick are guys that can swing, that can play multiple different positions and can back up multiple spots. And I think that's what Jarrett brings to the game, man. So I'm happy for him. And I think that it's a decent spot. Houston's offensive line is getting steadily better over the last couple of years, but they still need to continue to add depth to that room. So he's got a chance to compete, I think, in Houston.
Yeah. Jay Wick said Jerry doesn't trust Notre Dame after Julius Jones. And
Oh,
the appropriate answer from Tommy Guns, Zach Martin and Jalen Smith have determined that that's a lie. Yes.
At least one of them have.
At them have. Yeah. I mean, Jalen Smith for about a year and a half period was, he
was very good.
Parlayed that into a lot of money. He was very good for that year and a half. But Zach Martin is, obviously working on a Hall of Fame career. And that's why, it's like, I get another Notre Dame. But to your point, I think that if Harry Hiestand had been there a year earlier, we might be talking about a different result for Jarrett Patterson this past weekend.
I think so too. I mean, it was that's the unfortunate circumstance of playing football, right? Sometimes is that there's going to be some injuries at times. There's going to be some durability stuff. And that popped up with Jared. I mean, that's just kind of where we are. But I hope, because we've seen this also, where a guy goes through a little bit of a string of injuries and then he gets into the NFL and it's not really an issue anymore, at least to a degree, because you have to remember they're going to better medical staff, strength and conditioning staffs. I mean, Coach Bayless is the best in the business, in my opinion, on the college level. But, I mean, strength and conditioning coaches on the NFL level are a little bit of a different breed, at least the programs that they kind of run. So I think that he's going to be in a good spot, man. It's just about being in a good room and making sure that his body doesn't break down on him. Because I think that Jared can be a player in the NFL. It's just about being in the right situation, and hopefully Houston's the right situation for him.
Well, and speaking of right situations, Notre Dame did have a handful of guys sign the free agent contracts, the undrafted free agent contracts after the draft. Brandon Joseph and Chris Smith both went to Detroit. Kicker Blake Grupe down to New Orleans. Jason Adamalola to Jacksonville. Justin Adamalola to Green Bay. Josh Lugg with the Bears, and Bo Bauer ends up in Seattle. And let's start with Jason Adamalola. You touched on him earlier, but Beefeater said Pro Football Focus had him as a 4th round pick. What happened there? That 4th sounds a little bit high. I thought like best case he was going to be like a mid 5th round type guy. He ends up being undrafted. So I don't think you're necessarily shocked that he didn't get drafted, are you?
Now, in our preview again, we talked a little bit about Jason. I thought Jason was a borderline draftable player. Like if he went in the 6th or 7th round, I wouldn't have been shocked. I also am not shocked that he went priority free agent, just because he's a little bit of a niche player, Sean. Like he's a 285 pound defensive tackle. There's only so
for his
few
position. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's only so many teams that can use that type of player. I mean, just from a size perspective, right? I mean, I think he even showed up at 280 at his pro day. So he's played in between 275 and 285 at Notre Dame. So I'm not shocked that there's some teams that are hesitant on the size. And I think when you read the tea leaves, like forget about Pro Football Focus and like those outlets for a second. Like media get this wrong all the time. The tea leaves are this. It's that Jason Ademilola, and there's a hierarchy of the All-Star games for the senior All-Star games for the NFL draft process. There's a Senior Bowl, there's the East-West Shrine Bowl, then there's the NFL PA Bowl out in Pasadena, and then there's, a couple under that, like the Hula Bowl, College Gridiron Showcase, like the Tropical Bowl. There's a bunch of different bowls. But the top three are what you're really going to pay attention to, because how they pick those games is based upon who the NFL wants to see. Like, and that is how the Senior Bowl gets the roster. That's like East-West gets the roster. One, Jason got invited to the NFL PA Bowl. That's third in the hierarchy as far as the best All-Star games. That should be a little bit of indication of like, maybe the NFL is not as high as some media members are on him. One. Then two, he didn't get invited to the Combine. So he wasn't one of the 330 guys that went to the Combine, somewhere in that ballpark. And again, that's not the end-all be-all, because Marte Mapu, who's a safety linebacker out of Sac State, didn't get invited to the Combine. He went in the fourth round. So that's not the end all be all. But when you talk about some of the tea leaves around NFL PA Bowl, not getting a Combine invite, I don't think anybody should be necessarily shocked that he went undrafted. I would say this though, he got a really nice priority free agent deal. So that tells me though that there was demand for him. He was a guy that I think some teams at the end of the draft were eyeing to potentially draft, but when he fell through the cracks, he still got a nice little undrafted free agent contract, which is good for him. And I also think more than anything, Sean, Jacksonville is a really good spot for a guy like a Jason Ademilola, because one, they do employ three techs in a traditional sense where I think he could fit in that defense, and two, they don't have a lot of depth inside on the interior. So I think Jason's in a spot where he could potentially make that football team. Like he has a chance to do it. It's just about, it's about taking advantage of opportunity now, obviously.
Yeah. So like you look at him, you look at Brandon Joseph in Detroit, and, Brandon Joseph obviously left a year of eligibility on the table, whereas, he could be in when you're talking about a depleted safety room for Notre Dame, and here's Brandon Joseph going undrafted. Do you think he's got a chance to stick up there in Detroit?
I think it's possible, because Detroit's another team where one, they don't
You
have
seem very exasperated by that.
I'm just, man, Brandon has really zapped me of energy this draft process, man. I was so excited about him, and then obviously we know how it ended. And I mean, I was on this show last week, and I'm just like, I'm not sure I would draft Brandon. And apparently the NFL agreed with that sentiment a little bit, right? Because it's just wasn't a great draft process. It wasn't a good lone year with Notre Dame.
Let me ask you this. How much could he have improved his stock if he had returned for another year? Do you think he'd be in the same place next year? Or could he have improved it enough to be, like a third or fourth round guy?
I mean, there's nowhere to go but up, right? So, I mean, could he improve it? He was an undrafted free agent, so yeah. As long as he's a seventh rounder, he's potentially, upped his draft capital. I mean, honestly, Sean, I think it's possible, like to your question, I do, because I mean, I know things went not great in Brandon Joseph's 1 year at Notre Dame. He only had 2 good football games, in my opinion. Everything else was just kind of up and down and not very good most of the part. But I mean, we don't forget though that he was dynamic in 2020 at Northwestern, absolutely dynamic, and he was good again in 2021. Not quite as good as 2020, but he was still good. He was still a good player. This past year just wasn't good. So yeah, I think he could have helped himself. The problem is I'm not sure that there would have been a spot for him on Notre Dame if he chose to return. But either way, I mean, I think going back to school could have helped him a little bit, because he's still a pretty young kid for his age, also being only a redshirt junior. But I really just think that he had his eyes set on the NFL. And I mean, unfortunately, he went undrafted. Fortunately, he is in a Detroit room that has low numbers of safeties and not really the best talent in the safety room in general. So does he have a chance to stick? It's possible. But the thing that I have question marks about Brandon most is that he was a very inconsistent tackler, and he's not the most physically put together player of all time, right?
Yeah.
So when you're a undrafted free agent or a late round safety, you have to play special teams. And I'm not talking about returning punts and kicks and all that type of stuff. I'm talking about you have to cover, right? You have to cover kickoffs, punts. And I'm just not sure if he's going to ever be a stalwart on special teams. So I think it's going to be tough for him to stick. But I mean, I hope for the best for him, man, because I still think there's good football there. It just obviously did not develop this year.
Yeah. And I guess I guess it depends on how much he wants a paycheck at this point, how much he really wants it, because it definitely seems like just the mindset needs to change as the biggest starting point.
I said he was young for his age. He's young for his grade, his classification. Okay, folks, give me a break, man. It's a Monday. It's a Monday.
That's right. It is a Monday coming out of draft weekend. And I saw a couple people saying they're surprised to see me. Well, here I am. And fun being with Ryan, talking a little NFL draft on this Monday. And again, just a reminder that coming up tonight at 6:00, Ryan's going to be back with Brian because Kennedy Urlacher is announcing his commitment at about 6:00 tonight. So those guys will be on in my usual time slot at 6. That's why I'm bouncing here with Ryan, talking some draft in the afternoon. But glad we got a chance to do so. Good, like we said, this is like our first full-fledged show together. But it's been a lot of fun so far.
Sean, you don't have to tell me that I'm your favorite co-host, but you can if you would like. All right.
I can't hurt everybody else's feelings, Ryan. Come on.
Vince can handle it, man. He's a big boy. He can handle it.
I don't know. Vince can get a little wounded too. For as much as he talks the big game.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, you want to do a little rapid fire? Your first rapid fire? Let's go.
Do it. Yeah. First of my career, man. Let's not disappoint here, I guess. Yeah.
That's right. Fill in the blank on this first one. It's blank that Lorenzo Styles announced over the weekend that he's transferring to Ohio State. He's going to play in the secondary with his brother, Sonny.
It's good for the family that he transferred, I guess, right? I mean, hey, man, it's tough sometimes when one son has a game over here and another son has a game over here, and you have to try to make that work somehow, right? I mean, you have to designate one weekend for one spot, one weekend to the other, or parents go separate or whatever it is. I mean, the good thing is that the Styles family now can just go wherever Ohio State's playing. So
that's true.
Good for the parents, man. Good for the family.
I mean, they got them all together, and like, what would have happened if Sonny had ended up picking Notre Dame instead of Ohio State to begin with? You know, would we still have both of them here? And maybe Lorenzo works this whole thing out, and they're
true.
Both, it's like what it is completely unsurprising. This is what everyone kind of thought was going to happen, and then it happens. And at the same time, it's like, okay, well, apparently you weren't all that excited about playing in the secondary here at Notre Dame. So now you're just going to Ohio State where you're going to play in the secondary still.
Yes.
And then I've heard, and I don't know if you know if there's anything to it, but like the whole thing about, is he a walk-on the first year? They actually give him a scholarship right away. There's a lot of, there's some extra layers to this, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know about the scholarship part. I do know that I think the plan is to obviously play corner at Ohio State, and I think that the red shirt next year is on the table for him to develop his cornerback skills. So we might not even see him on the field in 2023 for Ohio State, except for maybe in a couple games, obviously with the 4-game rule. But it's gonna be interesting to watch, man. I'm still a fan of Lorenzo the athlete. It's just Lorenzo the football player was just never consistent enough, obviously.
Yeah. Did you see the Mitchell Evans tweet that he had about September 23rd getting a little bit more interesting or whatever it was?
I'll tell you this, Sean. If Mitchell has a breakout season for Notre Dame, which is very possible, obviously potentially being the tight end one, Notre Dame fans are going to love that man forever because that was an OG move, man, to do that. It was an OG move.
It was right up there at the top. On point, making some Notre Dame fans happy with that one, I think. So, speaking of transfers, we've got Tyler Buchner, of course, going to Alabama. And this is an interesting one that I saw posed, I think, over the weekend. Does Buchner going to Alabama help Notre Dame's quarterback recruiting ultimately in the long run?
Yeah, yes, I think it does because I think there's a couple layers to that. Honestly, is one, that like obviously the talent that Notre Dame's getting is valued, because even though Tyler Buchner did not have the production at Notre Dame that you would want, obviously because due to injuries and, was obviously relegated to a specialized role as a true freshman, he still was a player that was wanted by the University of Alabama, which I think tells you that there's talent in that room, which is attractive. And number two, now there's a easier pathway to playing time potentially early on in the next quarterback's career, right? Because Sean, you're going to talk about 2023 Sam Hartman. We know that. After Sam, though, 2024, we're talking about redshirt sophomore Steve Angeli, redshirt freshman Kenny Minchie, CJ Carr. Like, that's the known commodities that we know will be in that room potentially right now. I mean, we don't know if there's going to be a grad transfer again, or if there's going to be a transfer that's just there for depth. Like, we don't know what the next step's going to be, or if they bring in another 2024 quarterback. Like, we don't know what the next outcome is. But as of now, we know that Angeli and Minchie and Carr are going to be in that room. Well, I think that most people look at that and say, that means that this is an open opportunity for me, right? Like, there's no proven production that's going to be coming back. None of those guys at this moment have ever thrown a pass on the college level. They just haven't done it. So I think especially quarterback that looks at it and says, I'm very confident. Because the one thing about CJ, right? CJ Carr, is whether Tyler Buchner was coming back or not, CJ Carr has the swagger and the confidence that he was going to come in and start from day one. Like, he believes that, right? And he should. That's the players you want. And I think Notre Dame keeps targeting these players that are that confident. I think it helps, because they're going to say, there's obviously talent in that room, but I still think I can come in and play because there's not a lot of proven production coming back. So, yeah, I think it could definitely help.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what I was looking at in this is it's like Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr specifically, what they end up being and how they end up performing. I think that's going to have a huge impact on it. And like, when you've still got CJ Carr kind of out there being your point guy, and Buckner's gone, and he's going to have this opportunity potentially next year, I think that's going to have a huge impact on it.
Yeah.
It just, when you look at sort of the indirect impact as well with Buchner, like if he leaves Notre Dame, has success at Alabama, how that affects it. If he beats out, a 5-star guy like Ty Simpson, and of course, Jalen Milrose and all that as well, especially when you look at who his offensive coordinator is. I think he could have a huge impact ultimately, both direct and indirect, that his departure could have here for Notre Dame and recruiting the position.
Well, Sean, I guess my follow-up for you, and I actually think this is a very interesting conversation, is what's the other side of it, right? Like, what's the drawbacks from this? Is there a way that this could be perceived as a negative for Notre Dame quarterback recruiting? Like, is it the fact that if Tyler Buchner goes to Alabama, he blows up and it's like, oh, they weren't developed properly? Like, I guess I'm just curious of what the other side, what the counterpoint would be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might be the only downside, because as of right now, your number 2 quarterback was desirable to the most successful program in the country over the last decade. Like, your number 2. Now, obviously, if Tommy Rees is there, does Tyler Buchner end up at Alabama? Probably not. But Nick Saban still has to sign off on it, right?
Yes, he does.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I think the only potential downside is if Buchner, ends up going out not performing well at Alabama this year. Minor. But you're right. Like, all the other direct impact stuff, it's only good for Notre Dame, I think. Like, everything that's happening from the Notre Dame perspective right now.
And you have obviously a new OC with Jared Parker. You have Gino Guidugli coming in as the quarterback coach. So you got a brand new developmental staff for the quarterback side of things. So if Sam Hartman comes in, even though technically he was developed by a different program, if he comes in and he balls out at Notre Dame for the lone year, quarterbacks are going to want to come to Notre Dame. They're going to want to, because they're going to see all the talent that's in the wide receiver room. They're going to be like, I'm always going to be behind a good offensive line. You're going to have good running backs. It's literally just been about quarterback development. It's been kind of the stickler for quarterback recruiting for a couple of years. And if that changes, then I think it's going to be a very desirable place.
Yeah, good. That's a good point as well. So, Archer, a question from the chat. Don't know if you guys saw it, but Caleb Smith entered the transfer portal. Of course, a wide receiver from Ohio State. Do you think Notre Dame gives him a call?
So Brian talked about Caleb Brown a little bit on the message board. I forget if it was last night
Did I
or
say Smith or
this morning.
did I say Brown, by the way?
You said Smith, but I mean,
Okay.
we're good now. We're good.
Too many Caleb Smiths around here.
There's a lot of Caleb Smiths, man. There's a lot
They all
of
spelled
Caleb
it with
Smiths.
a K as well. So
yes. Yeah, you're right.
Caleb Brown, obviously. Yes.
Yeah, but I know Brian talked about it last night or this morning, and he was talking about how he loved Caleb Brown coming out of high school. He was a kid that I know Notre Dame looked at a little bit. I think he's an Illinois guy originally. So they looked at him. It's just, I mean, one, it's just, would he want to come to Notre Dame, I guess, right? If the fit would make sense, all that great stuff. But I mean, he kind of pointed, because I don't really have a crazy opinion on this one, Archer, because I didn't evaluate Caleb Brown coming out of high school. I've heard he's a really good player, but I haven't seen him. Brian told me that he was a big fan of him and he would definitely take my Notre Dame if he wanted to come. I just don't know if I just don't know if the fit would make sense, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I just feel like the wide receiver room right now is in such a good place with all their young guys and, between the freshmen and Tobias Merriweather, and then you have Caleb Smith, the young Caleb Smith coming in this summer, Caleb with a K, once again. And I just feel like the receiver room is in a good enough place right now that you probably don't need to go out and hit the transfer portal there. The priority is obviously at safety. That's where I would start. I would make sure that I'm addressing that before I start looking at an extra wide receiver. I think that they thought that the elder Caleb Smith from Virginia Tech, from an intangible standpoint, was going to bring them, a little bit more. And we got to talk to him once and he said all the right things and all that kind of stuff, but obviously things didn't end up working out for him here. So I just don't feel like another wide receiver at this point is really the way they need to go with the way the roster is shaping up.
I mean, because especially there's a lot of optimism in that room, to your point.
Exactly.
I mean, Tobias, Dion, Chris Tyree moved the wide receiver, obviously, right? I mean, you're still talking about Jaden Thomas, who was an absolute star at the Blue Gold game. You got the young guys like Jaden Greathouse and Braylon James, Enrico Flores, and Caleb Smith coming in. Like, there's still a lot of room. And then also, Notre Dame already has, I know, because this is a question of like the immediacy for 2023, but if you're looking forward to the future of Notre Dame, you already have 2 commits in the 2024 class by two really talented players in Cam Williams and Isaiah Canyon, and we're expecting at least one more, potentially 2 more wide receivers in the 2024 group. So I think that wide receivers in a great spot. So I don't know if the need necessarily makes sense, but I know Brian was a big fan of them, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, like, you can be a big fan of him, but I just don't know that he makes that much sense for this Notre Dame team because of all those things. Yeah.
Agreed.
So the NFL draft, obviously over. We talked a lot about it in our opening segment. The draft is held in the NFL almost 3 months after the season ends, the Super Bowl, and more than 4 months after the college football season ends. So my question to you, Ryan, should they hold the draft sooner, or are you good with it where it is in late April?
I've actually always wanted it to be moved up a little bit, and because I always wanted it before free agency, personally, because I feel like we always talk about the balance of best player available versus meeting a need in the draft. I feel like that's a lot easier to find. I feel like it's a lot easier for teams to settle and to focus on taking the best player available, knowing that there's a free agency window that's going to open up and that you could fill it that way. And that's more like meeting the needs based upon what you weren't able to fill in the draft. So I've always actually wanted it before free agency even kicks off, and to fill out the roster that way, because I'm a big believer in drafting the best player available as much as possible when you get to the draft. And I feel like that would make a lot of teams steer that direction if they were before free agency, because there's more holes in your roster. So I've always been move it up a few weeks, man, like move it up. Cause we're also in like that kind of weird window where it's like you have the All-Star game stuff late January into February. And then you have a whole month and a half off. They're going to the combine, and you have another month and a half off. And then they finally get to draft day. You're just like, it's a lot of space in between, man. Like, let's just knock this thing out and let's let these guys draft for best player available. Cause I think that'll make the product better at the end of the day as well.
Yeah. Cause like when you look at both the NBA and the WNBA. Like the WNBA, the college season ended a week later, not even a week later, a couple days later, I think they had the draft. NBA, the finals end, and boom, they're holding the draft pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Baseball is a little different, but still, like, they hold theirs in the middle of the season. It's not like you're going to fill out your big league rosters with rookie draft picks right away, but still they're doing theirs in the middle of the season. It just seems like the NFL, I wonder, because the NFL is such its own beast. Like, do they care that if they did it sooner, like they might be competing with the Masters or March Madness or, any of that kind of stuff, so, are they fine pushing it back a little bit farther? I agree with you, though. It would seem to make more sense to do it before free agency, do your draft picks first and then, go out and address, free agents to fill out the rest of your roster. So I would like to see it pushed up. I don't know how far they would want to push it up, though. And again, like if those other sports matter enough.
I think that, I think you hit on a key point of why it will probably never change, is that the NFL is its own beast, right? Like it's very unique.
They set their own calendar.
They set their own calendar. And the reason that they space everything out so much is because it's always going to be a spectacle. Like, everyone's going to watch Senior Bowl practices. Everyone's going to watch the draft. Everything's going to freak out when it's free agency. Like, space it out so it's not becoming too close where it's like you're taking viewership away from one for the other. You know what I mean? Like, you're competing against yourself. I think that's why they space it out. It's just because football is now America's pastime. It's not baseball anymore. It's not. So
Absolutely.
You look at that and they're just going to say, space things out, and we're going to be the king of that period of time. That's going to be our time. We don't have to compete with ourselves or with anybody else.
Where does the draft rank for you, Ryan, who does, as someone who does, draft stuff as well as recruiting stuff, so you do a little bit of both. Yep. Where does it rank for you in terms of events that you'd want to cover, like in person?
I actually have never wanted to go to the draft. I had never wanted to. I go to the combine, which is a great time, obviously, in Indianapolis. I have actually never been down to the Senior Bowl. I would like to get down to the Senior Bowl, though. I would much rather cover the draft process events than actually covering the draft. I actually prefer to just sit on my couch and watch the draft, because that's like kind of all the work's over with, like you can kind of relax a little bit. But like being boots on the ground in Indianapolis, being boots on the ground in Mobile, or out in Vegas for the East West, or even Pasadena, California,
actually
for
seeing the players do their thing. Yeah.
Well, I'm an evaluator at heart, man. I want to see the guys in person and compete. Like, at the end of the day, I don't want to see it. This is my thing. Like, I don't care about what they look like in a suit, right? Like, it's just not, it doesn't matter.
That's very true.
I want to see what they look like running around.
I wouldn't mind going and experiencing at once, one time, just to kind of see, especially that first night, what kind of the inner workings and stuff like that. But at the, watching it on TV the other night, I was sitting there with my wife and I'm like, even as a fan, like, your team makes one pick, in the first round. It's like, what do you do the rest of the night besides just stand around and, drink your stuff?
And for you as a Cowboys fan, they were the 26th pick, right? So you were but you had to wait till like 11:30 for that guy.
I know.
Probably.
I know. Be stumbling over by the time that rolled around. That's exactly right. That's right. This question came in earlier. Where did it go? Okay. Thanks for the super chat, Tyler. He said he loved the Notre Dame players that signed the undrafted free agent deals, but the Deuce Vaughn pick to the Cowboys gave him some tears. That was obviously one of the cooler moments of the whole thing, when your dad is a scout for an NFL team, gets to make that call to you and tell you that team has just drafted you. That's pretty cool.
It's even cooler too, because for people that don't know, because they just hear Deuce Vaughn, Vaughn's real name is Chris Vaughn. And the reason he's Deuce is because he's a junior, right?
Right.
And so his dad, that's the scout, is obviously also Chris Vaughn. So same name and everything too. So it's just like adds to everyone saw the video of him calling his son and just being like, hey, you want to come to work with me next week or whatever? Like, just really cool stuff, man. Like, yeah. And Deuce Vaughn's a really good player too. I don't want people to think that this is just about like, who you know, and that's how you get opportunities. Like, no, Deuce Vaughn was the Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. He's just small, like he's 5'5", 180 pounds.
Yeah, I think they said he's the smallest guy in like the last 20 years to be drafted or something.
I believe it. I believe it. I mean, he's 5'5" even at the combine, so he is historically small. But he's a good football player, man. So, yeah, he's never going to be an every down back, obviously, for Dallas. But on a team that has Tony Pollard and those guys, like, you don't need him to be an every down back. Like, maybe he contributes in the pass game a little bit. Maybe he returns some kicks and punts. Just a really cool moment, man, though. It really was.
Yep. I think he's an intriguing guy for sure. And, like, when I saw that they got him that late, I was like, wow, Deuce Vaughn lasted this long because he had a really good last couple of years for the Kansas State Wildcats. But, a really fun moment to see that. Keith wants to know if you've seen the Richard kid who played safety at Vanderbilt.
Richard, I need to look up who this is. Is that? No, I'm not sure who Richard is. I'm not sure. Was he in the draft this year, or are we talking about a transfer portal kid?
I think he's talking about transfer portal is what he was talking about. Yeah.
The only safety I know from Vanderbilt, his name is Dericky Wright, who is a big, like 6'4", 230-pound safety who's kind of like a hybrid player. I don't know who Richard is, though. But if you want to put in the chat and give a little more context, I'm just not sure who that is.
Okay. So former Tennessee quarterback Hendon Hooker is 25 years old, and he says his age shouldn't be a concern. Here's his pre-draft quote. Quote, it's a long-term position. Tom Brady just finished at 45. The age limit on quarterbacks, there is none. So do you buy or sell that, Ryan?
I mean, I don't buy it because it's super hyperbolic. One, I mean, there's no age limit. Like, there's an age. Everyone has an age limit. Like, Tom Brady wasn't going to play until he's 90, right? I mean,
right.
So there's an age limit.
Right.
I also think that it's. I don't like. I personally, just for me, Sean, like I don't like putting guys into the same bucket and just kind of generalizing. Right? It's like, oh, Tom Brady can play to 45. Everyone can. No, Tom Brady's a freak show. Like he's
still the outlier. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, he's a crazy outlier, and he could have played for a couple more years if he felt like it. Hendon Hooker. The good thing about the quarterback position, and the point does stand that Hendon Hooker, despite already being 25, turning 26 as a rookie. He will be 29, turning 30 when his first contract runs up because he'll have the 4-year deal, right? So 29, 30, getting a second contract as a quarterback, you're still okay. Like you're still in a good window where if you're good, you still have a nice window to be able to be a good football player moving forward. If it was a running back, it would be a completely different conversation because, think about like Todd Gurley, for instance, right? If Todd Gurley wasn't going to get his second contract until he was 29, he's already out of the NFL. He got out of the NFL when he was like 26 because of the injuries and everything. So I think there's some validity to what they're trying to say in that. But I also think that we're generalizing and using the outlier as the as the example. Like that's just not how that works traditionally.
Exactly. And and it's also not just about age coming out of college. It's also about why he's still there at that age. Coming out of college, like he obviously could have come out last year after his first season, I think it was at Tennessee. I mean, he's had some nice numbers, but he's playing in a little bit of a niche system at Tennessee. And that's really when he thrived out of it, had, injury stuff and all that kind of thing as well. And that's a great point about his contract and how old he'll be and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you can't use the greatest of all time as your example when you're saying, well, age doesn't matter because Tom Brady played till he's 45. How many other guys have even played until they're 40? The list is very, very short.
It's also the Russell Wilson thing too, right, Sean? It's like, oh, you could be 5'11" and be a good quarterback in the NFL. It's like, yeah, you can, but the cards are still stacked against you guys. Like it's not the exception does not become the rule just because there's a couple outliers out of the thousands of quarterbacks that play in the NFL. Like it's just not how that works, right? That's why, and I get it to a degree. That's why a lot of NFL teams are very hesitant on outliers. Like I completely understand it. Like we just talked about Deuce Vaughn. He's an outlier.
Yeah.
Peter Skoronski went 11th overall to Tennessee Titans. He is an outlier, though, as an offensive tackle because of his arm length. Like, there's outliers everywhere. And I feel like we take the word outlier as this huge negative. Like, oh, man, you're saying the guy can't be good. No, I'm saying that the deck is stacked against them, though. So it's a great story if they are a part of the outliers that make it so that rule isn't 100% concrete. But at the end of the day, you do need to understand the thought process of some NFL GMs. It's like, 5'10" quarterback. It's only worked twice in ever, right? Offensive tackles with 32-inch arms. You can count the number of offensive tackles that have made a Pro Bowl with 32-inch arms on no fingers because it's never happened. Like, we have to understand that concept.
Yeah. And I don't know how long Zach Martin's arms are. I think they're longer than 32 inches, but
yeah, they're like 33, and even he got kicked inside.
Yeah,
so,
and that's what I was going to say. He was obviously a tackle, in college, and they pushed him inside to guard in the NFL. He's turned out to be a great guard, but yeah, he had shorter arms as well. Thanks again for the super chat there, Tyler. He said, funny thing about the draft, every team is drafting quarterbacks trying to find the next Brock Purdy. And I mean, when you go 259 one year, and that's, everyone that, again, exception to the rule, but it gives everybody hope, I guess, regardless of what round you get picked in when you have a guy like Purdy last year.
It's a funny point by Tyler because, of course, we got the 3 quarterbacks in the first round. You got Hendon Hooker and Will Levis in the second round. But then there was a little bit of a quiet period until the end of the day 2. But then, and I have something else to say about something that was put in the chat because it's slightly wrong. A point that was just made. But so then we got a weird run on quarterbacks in the 4th round, Sean, like 4th round and on. And I do think that there's some validity to that, Tyler, because we're talking about guys that have some ability, but like 4th round's probably a little bit too high for a couple of these guys. Like I like Jake Hayner, for instance, right? He was a talented quarterback, but we saw some other 4th round quarterbacks where I'm just like, man, I don't know. I mean, even Sean Clifford was picked in the 5th round out of Penn State. It's just like, guys, I don't know, dog. Like, I don't know about that one, man. That's kind of weird to me. So there was a weird run of quarterbacks in day 3. Really weird one.
Yep, I agree. So a lot of reporters are notorious, of course, for spoiling draft picks. Like Twitter has done that, obviously, spoiling the picks before they're actually announced. What is the worst thing that anyone has ever spoiled for you?
Well, I took this a couple different ways, Sean. Like from an NFL draft perspective, the worst thing that someone ever spoiled for me was that, well, this is a little bit of a back and forth here. So someone spoiled to me. It was a trainer that Trey Lance was going to be the 3rd overall pick a couple years ago. Spoiled it because I do like the build up and the anticipation. Like, wow, let's see what happens, right? But that one also ended up being good for me because I made some money on that knowledge that year, which is good, right?
Very nice.
Yeah, man. But I mean, that was one where I was like, I wanted to really see because all the reports leading up to that draft were 49ers love Mac Jones, Kyle Shanahan's guy, and then Trey Lance ended up being the 3rd overall pick. But I got a little bit of money on that one, so it was wasn't too bad.
Nice. I wish mine would have worked out that way. The worst one I ever had, and this was back even, before Twitter. This has been a good 16, 17, maybe. Well, it was 2005 is when it was. When North Carolina and Illinois played in the national championship game, basketball national championship game. And that was like that great Illinois team with Darren Williams and, all those guys. And Carolina ended up winning the thing, but it was back when I was still doing Notre Dame baseball radio. So we were on a trip. We're flying home that night. I've got my DVR set. I'm going to come home after the trip. I'm going to watch the national championship game in my recliner. We go bus, flight, bus back into campus. And literally, as we're getting off the bus, I hear one of the coaches say, "Oh, yeah, North Carolina beat Illinois." So I had made it like literally about to get off the bus and it got spoiled at the end. So I ended up, I watched a little bit of it, and it wasn't because like I was a fan of either team. It was just supposed to be, I remember it was like a great, highly anticipated game. It was Roy Williams' first national championship, his head coach at North Carolina, and all those great players that Bill Self have recruited.
Yeah.
And, and left behind. And so, yeah, we got like after a 3.5, 4 hour trip all the way back to campus until somebody spoiled it. So
Sean, I don't know if you're a How I Met Your Mother fan, but there was an episode where they all weren't able to watch the Super Bowl together, so they all didn't watch it, and for the entire day they were trying to just basically wear blinders and not find out who won that Super Bowl. And I think 4 out of 5 of them, it got spoiled to them in some capacity that day. It's just like, no, we need to know, which is
yeah, I'm probably lucky that, it took as long as it did, because again, like in today's world with Twitter and everything else, you can't even go that long.
You can't find. Well, that's the worst, is that there are some guys on Twitter from like the draft perspective that always tip the picks now too. So even before it goes on, like Ari Mirov's one of those guys where you always find it on Twitter. If you want to, I mean, some people want to know just the tip offs before it happens, because like I guess they can't wait. But if you want to know, just go follow him on Twitter, and you'll always know who's going to be the pick, right before it happens. Because literally people go to the draft just to get those tip offs, just to put it on Twitter and be the first guy. Like
right,
it always happens.
Just so they can be that guy. Yep, that's exactly right. All right, so during the Knicks Miami Heat playoff basketball game yesterday, they're of course showing Spike Lee up on the sideline doing his Spike Lee stuff, in his courtside seats and whatever. So when you're watching a game, whether it's basketball or whatever sport, do you like them to show the celebrities in the stands, or do you want them to just stick to the game?
I don't mind it if it's in the downtime. Like, I don't want them to cut like during important plays or anything like that, right? But it's like, I do think personally for like, if you're not in person, in my opinion, and you're just watching on TV, the experience is amplified by showing people's emotions. Like, I do think that that's kind of interesting sometimes. So I don't mind them going to the crowd or going to celebrities at times, as long as it's not like in a crucial moment of the game where I'm just like, guys, like I want to watch this game right now, right? Like this is important. As long as it's in some downtime where it's like during a timeout or during a stoppage, like sure, why not? Like I don't know, it doesn't bother me personally.
I'm the same way. Like as long as they don't like beat it to death, like I'm old enough to remember this is, this is like way before your time, back, Magic Johnson's, Showtime Lakers, when Jack Nicholson and Diane Cannon, like they were like they would show them, because the Lakers were obviously always in the NBA finals, and so you would always see Jack Nicholson with his sunglasses and Diane Cannon, up jumping around. I almost ripped my microphone off the table. She'd be up jumping around doing her stuff, and it's like, that was like it seemed novel back then.
Yeah.
But then it morphed into like in the 90s, like Ashley Judd and the Kentucky Wildcats. And now you've got, like Matthew McConaughey in Texas football and those kind of things. As long as they don't get carried away with it, you can show it a few times. And like in the Knicks case, because I saw people complain about, stop showing Spike Lee. It's like the Knicks are hardly ever in the playoffs anymore. Like Spike Lee. It's like
that was their first.
Fairly noteworthy.
That was their first playoff series win since like, when was the last time? It was like a crazy amount of time, man. But yeah,
I want to say 15 years maybe or
something like that. Yeah. I mean, I think it's cool sometimes. I mean, like, obviously I'm right outside of Philly. So like when it's an Eagles game, like they always flash to Bradley Cooper in his suite and stuff like that. Like it's fine.
Right.
Man. Like, I don't mind as long as it's not interrupting me actually watching the game.
Yeah. I think it's kind of fun to know, because, like, again, like with Los Angeles, like if you watch like a Dodgers game, you'd see like Mary Hart and I think Pat Sajak and Larry King would be like, like back behind the backstop. I think it's kind of, especially when you're not in a place like LA where you expect the celebrities to be, some of these other places, it's kind of fun to see like, again, like Bradley Cooper. Oh yeah. Fan of the Eagles. And
didn't know he was like an Eagles fan. Like that's pretty neat. It's pretty neat. Yeah,
exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, that's going to do it. You did very well for your first rapid fire run through today.
I appreciate that, Sean. I appreciate that. Tell Vince I was better than whatever he's ever done. Okay.
All right. I will. I'll be sure to mention that.
Jesse, I can't top Jesse. So leave Jesse where he is. It's just Vince though. Just Vince.
As long as you beat Vince. That's right.
Yes.
All right. So again, 6:00 tonight, Ryan's going to be back with Brian. The Kennedy Urlacher commitment is going on at 6:00 tonight. So they've got a little commitment show this evening at 6:00. Looking forward to that. I enjoyed it, Ryan. I will, I don't know if we'll when we'll do this again, but maybe we need to do it more often. I don't know.
We need to get in one of our contracts, man, that we need X amount of shows together. Like
That's right. That's right. For sure. Especially this summer. Like there's probably a lot of NFL stuff we could talk this summer for that.
I know. And Vince will be available during the summer too, right? So we can mix and match a lot more now.
What does Vince know?
It was fun though, man.
Just in case he's listening, so we can stick it to him once again.
Oh, he's.
But he gets the day off today, so like he's got nothing to complain about.
Oh, is he off today?
As far as I know, I don't think. I mean, like no show today. He was supposed to be on. You know, if we were doing the regular show, he would have been on with me tonight. So
that's funny. That's funny.
Whatever. All right. Talk to you guys later. Hit the like button on your way out if you would, and of course, subscribe, rate, and review. I'll talk to you soon, Ryan.